All right, hello. Welcome to my presentation. I will be talking about foreign direct investment and GDP growth in Latin America. My name is Sean Caldwell. So this is my introduction. We have the research question, what explains differences in a country's level of economic growth in Latin America? So one of the main debates between neoliberal and post-colonial scholars when discussing economic policy is the level of globalism that a nation should embrace in relation to their economy. Neoliberals argue that free trade and international cooperation should be implemented to increase economic growth through methods such as foreign direct investment. Post-colonial scholars argue that this is harmful to a developing nation's economy and that industry develops better with insular nations with high tariffs and low foreign direct investment. I am comparing these theories and how accurate they are within the context of the region of Latin America. So this is my literature review. So past studies have taken different theories of international relations and analyzed how those theories have been proven or disproven by observable data. Some studies, such as the one conducted by Robert R.S. in 1975, looks at alternative methods of organizing economies and businesses and changing how we determine a successful economy. Other theories have proposed the idea of stabilization funds, which nations can set up to save money for harder times, as presented by Kevin Gallagher in his 2011 study. My approach focuses on a more international angle and international cooperation rather than internal fixes because I think most countries lack the resources and wealth to restructure their economies independently. James Lee Ray in 1978 wrote a study that talked about that that addressed the issues with international cooperation and claimed that it will inevitably end in exploitation. I do not believe that this analysis is necessarily correct because I think it is too overtly focused on the flow of capital and currency and neglects the less tangible benefits of foreign direct investment, such as new businesses, economic experience, and improved infrastructure. Some scholars have pointed out that lack of development is due to the traditional divide between agriculture and industry, such as David Whelan in his 1963 study. He argues in his works that Latin America lacks the industrial capabilities to grow and should shift away from the agricultural sector. I disagree with this reasoning because Latin America's most prominent resources are in agriculture, and that is an area where they can compete competitively with the rest of the world. They should be able to grow faster by emphasizing their strengths. The final study that I looked at was the one that was most closely similar to my own, and it was a study published by Western Economic Association International in 2001, which showcases some of the successes FDI has had in Asia, especially South Korea and Japan. This study is very close to what I will be looking at and argue many of the same points, but I believe that the success of FDI can be effectively implemented in Latin America using a very similar system to the Asian model proposed by Western Economic. They also argue that the growth is conditional on several other factors, such as the liberalization of trade and level of education of the nation. I think that these factors are less important, especially within the confines of this approach, because of the cultural and industrial makeup of Latin America. So, my theory and hypothesis. So, my theory is that the theory that I'm proposing is in Latin America, the level of economic growth can be increased with an increase in the level of foreign direct investment. Therefore, my hypothesis is foreign direct investment causes more economic growth as measured in percent GDP growth than isolationist or self-reliant policies. This is because by connecting to the world economy, nations have more access to capital, which will stimulate the economy and create new businesses and opportunities, which will result in economic growth. The alternative hypothesis I have is that foreign direct investment causes more economic growth than isolationism because isolationist policies are so corrupt that any policy by comparison results in far more growth. So let's talk about my statistical method. So this study will look at the nations of Latin America and measure the variables foreign direct investment, economic growth, level of corruption, and level of isolationism. So the first two variables are foreign direct investment and economic growth. They can be measured pretty simply using the total amount of foreign direct investment in a nation measured in US dollars and the rate of GDP growth respectively. Corruption will be measured by ranking the nations from most to least corrupt. The ranking will be determined by the number of government officials convicted of crimes, perception of corruption in the minds of the people, and freedom of businesses to operate. Level of isolationism will similarly be ranked, and that will be decided by the level of free trade allowed in the nation, the level of various tariffs, and the net import and exports relative to the GDP of that nation. So we will also look at some control variables. So we will compare nations with these control variables in mind to qualify the results of the study. The first control will be initial GDP. Countries will be compared with those of similar GDP initially because as GDP increases, growth becomes more and more difficult as a nation inches towards maximum production. The next variable will be region. I will only be looking at states from Latin America because they have a very similar history and culture, and the region is connected to the theories of the research. I will also look at nations with comparatively similar levels of sanctions, since those can have a large impact on economic growth. I will also control for the level of democracy because several rival hypotheses have claimed it may impact a level of growth, and I would like to disprove those theories. I will also control for population, which is another rival theory connected to growth. So, the secondary method I will use to look at this phenomenon will be the comparative case study of nations using a most similar systems design. Since most of these nations share a similar history, religion, and government type, the states that I will be looking at for this study will be Chile and Ecuador, and in Group 1, and Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Panama in Group 2. In these nations, I will study and compare the level of foreign direct investment they receive and the related level of economic GDP growth. Chile and Ecuador will represent mid-sized nations, and the other three will represent smaller states. So after I looked into these various nations, we discovered that Chile has a high level of foreign direct investment and as well a high level of economic growth. Ecuador has a lower level of foreign direct investment and a low level of economic growth for a nation of that size. And then in Group 2, El Salvador had the least level of foreign direct investment and also the least level of economic growth, with Costa Rica being a middle ground of the two variables, and Panama having the highest level of foreign direct investment and as well the highest level of economic growth. So now we're going to take a look at expectations. I expect that nations with high levels of foreign direct investment, such as Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, will have fast growth rates and largely expanding economies. I believe that these trends will continue in the smaller nations where level of growth they received relates directly to their level of foreign direct investment when adjusted using my control variables. This is supported by the comparative case study, which found that within the first group, Chile had the higher level of growth, and within the second group, Panama had the higher level of growth, with those two nations being the ones that also received the highest level of foreign direct investment. So hopefully that would be indicative of all medium-sized states in the region and all small-sized states in the region. So far, my theory that more foreign direct investment would lead to more economic growth was supported by the data I have on the nations of Latin America currently. Uh, the theory that more foreign direct investment will lead to more economic growth was supported by the case study, and I project that this will hold true over time. This would support neoliberal theory and encourage nations to push for more foreign direct investment as a means of stimulating their economy and creating growth. If my conclusion is disproven, I believe it would be primarily due to waste in the system and corruption that pervades many Latin American governments. I think the main variables to look at in future studies should be the level of free trade or education of a country and see how that relates to their overall growth. Studies in this vein should be continued until economists are able to accurately create growth and know which variables impact it the most. So now we're going to talk about the timeline and budget. This study would take place over the course of 10 years so that the full market ramifications of the study can be seen and the effects of a period of recession or a expansion become less prominent. Initially, the researchers would look into past research and studies, such as the one I have presented in my literature review. The study would mainly consist of recording data and analyzing overall trends to see if a correlation exists between the variables I have presented. The budget of the project would be quite small, with the main cost being hiring a team of researchers to study the available data. If you had a team of one qualified political scientist and two research assistants, the scientist would earn the median wage of $56.52 for every hour of work, and the assistants would make the average rate of $19.41 an hour. Any other expenses would be largely negligible. And this would be my bibliography where you can see my sources for my literature review as well as other sources that I used for background data and in the comparative case study. If you would like to know more about the data I used for the comparative case study, that was mostly taken from the Foreign Direct Investment in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is my fourth source down.